exactly like my previous life. It happened on a Tuesday evening. I had just walked into the house when I heard shouting. My father's voice, angry. My mother's voice, upset. And Mason, sounding terrified. I almost laughed. I remembered this day perfectly. 3 years ago, I thought it was the worst day of my life. Now, it felt like watching a movie I had already seen. I walked into the living room. Dad immediately stood up. His face was red. There you are. I looked at him calmly. Mom sat on the sofa, arms crossed. Mason stood beside her, eyes lowered, looking exactly like an innocent victim. I knew that expression. He had practiced it for years. Dad threw several receipts onto the coffee table. Explain this. I glanced at them. Bank statements. Withdrawal records. I already knew what they showed. $5,000 had disappeared from Mason's account. Or at least, that's what he claimed. I looked at him. He avoided my eyes. Interesting. Even after getting a second life, he still followed the exact same script. Dad pointed at the papers. Did you take it? Silence. I remembered this moment. In my first life, I panicked. I tried explaining, tried defending myself, because I was innocent. This time, I simply looked at Mason. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I almost pitied him. Almost. Well, Dad demanded. I looked at him. No. Silence. Dad frowned. No. I didn't take it. Mason finally looked up. His eyes were already red. An impressive performance. But, he said quietly. I nearly smiled. Here it comes. I saw you in my room yesterday. Mom's expression changed immediately. You were in his room? I nodded. I borrowed his phone charger. Mason shook his head. The money disappeared after that. Silence. Mom sighed. A long, disappointed sigh. I knew that sigh too. She always used it when she wanted me to admit something. Why would you do this? She asked softly. I looked at her. For a moment, I almost forgot to breathe. Because not once, not even once, did she ask if I was innocent. Not, did you really do it? Not, is there another explanation? Nothing. She had already decided. Exactly like my previous life. I looked at Dad, then Mom, then Mason. The scene felt painfully familiar. I finally understood something. The problem was never this accusation. The problem was trust. Or rather, the complete lack of it. Dad folded his arms. Return the money. I blinked. I don't have it. Enough. His voice rose. I'm serious. So am I. Silence. Mason suddenly spoke. I don't care about the money. I almost laughed. Of course. He always said that. I just don't understand why my own brother would steal from me. Mom looked heartbroken. Dad looked furious. I looked at Mason. He looked devastated. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him. In my previous life, I eventually learned what happened. Mason had lost money gambling online. He was terrified, so he blamed me, and our parents accepted it immediately. I spent months trying to clear my name. Months. Eventually, the truth came out. Nobody apologized. Dad simply said, at least everything worked out. Mom told me not to hold grudges. Mason promised to do better. And somehow, I became the bad person for remaining hurt. I looked around the room, then realized something surprising. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Because I already knew the ending. Dad pointed toward me. I never thought you'd become this kind of person. I almost smiled. Interesting. I had supported this family for years. Paid bills. Worked part-time jobs. Shared scholarships. Sacrificed opportunities. Yet one accusation erased everything. Mom looked disappointed. That expression hurt in my first life. Now, it simply looked familiar. Finally, Dad pointed at the door. If you hate this family so much, leave. Silence. I remember these exact words. Every syllable. Every pause. In my first life, I cried. Actually cried. I apologized for something I didn't do. Begged him not to be angry. Promised to earn everyone's trust again. Then I stayed. I spent the next 3 years sacrificing everything for people who never trusted me in the first place. This time, I smiled. Okay. Silence. Nobody moved. Mom blinked. Dad frowned. Mason looked confused. Apparently, that wasn't the response they expected. What? Dad asked. I looked at him. You said leave. Silence. I'm leaving. Nobody spoke. Mom looked uncomfortable. Dad looked irritated. Mason looked alarmed. Because they expected another argument, another explanation, another apology, not acceptance. I walked past them, straight toward my room. Behind me, Dad's voice echoed. "Where are you going?" "Packing." Silence. I opened my closet, pulled out a bag. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, my laptop, my wallet, phone charger. Done. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. When I returned to the living room, all 3 of them were still standing there, watching me. Mom frowned. "You're serious?" I nodded. She looked completely confused. But she stopped speaking, probably because she didn't know what came next. I picked up my bag, walked toward the front door. Then Dad's voice stopped me. "If you leave today..." I turned around. His expression remained hard. "Don't ever come back." Silence. I looked at him, then Mom, then Mason. Strangely, my heart felt calm. For the first time in years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no disappointment. Because I finally understood something. People can only throw you away if you keep handing yourself back to them. I wasn't doing that anymore. Dad waited, probably expecting me to panic, to cry, to stay. Instead, I smiled, a small smile, then answered, "I won't." Silence. Mom's eyes widened. Mason looked shocked. Even Dad seemed surprised. I opened the front door. Cool evening air touched my face. For some reason, it felt wonderful. I stepped outside, then stopped, not because I wanted to go back, because I suddenly remembered something. In my previous life, I thought this moment was my ending. I was wrong. It was my beginning. I adjusted my bag, started walking. And this time, I didn't look back. I remembered everything. That was my biggest advantage. Not intelligence, not talent, memory. I knew exactly what would happen over the next 3 years. Every market crash, every company that would explode, every forgotten stock that would suddenly become valuable, every opportunity one missed in my first life. I sat inside a cheap internet cafe and opened the stock market app. My bank account contained exactly $3,200. Everything I owned. In my previous life, I would have protected that money, saved it, used it carefully. This time, I invested every dollar. I didn't hesitate because I knew what was coming. I purchased shares in a small battery company nobody cared about. The market called it risky. Analysts ignored it. Investors laughed at it. I bought everything I could. Then I waited. 3 days later, the company announced a partnership with a major electric vehicle manufacturer. The stock exploded. 20%, 40%, 70%. By the end of the week, my money had doubled. I stared at the screen, then laughed. Actually laughed. It worked. I sold immediately, then invested again. A small technology company, then a pharmaceutical company, then a logistics company. One after another. Everything moved exactly as I remembered. I wasn't guessing. I already knew the answers. Within 2 months, my money reached $20,000. I stared at the numbers. In my first life, it had taken me 3 years to save that much. This time, it took weeks. But 20,000 wasn't enough. Not for what I wanted. I needed more. Much more. So I did something I had never done before. I called Leo, my best friend, one of the few people who treated me like family in my first life. He answered immediately. "You're alive." I laughed. "I've only been gone 2 months." "I know, but your family keeps saying you disappeared." I smiled. "Good. Let them think that. Can we meet?" "Sure." An hour later, we sat inside a small noodle restaurant. Leo frowned at me. "You look different." I raised an eyebrow. "Ow." He thought for a moment. "Happier." The answer surprised me. Maybe he was right. I ordered tea, then looked at him. "I need to borrow money." He nearly choked. "How much?" 10,000. Silence. Leo blinked, then blinked again. "You disappeared for 2 months and came back asking for $10,000. I laughed. Basically, he looked horrified. "What happened to you?" I leaned back. "I found an opportunity." "What opportunity?" "The kind that makes people rich." He stared at me, then sighed. "You sound insane." Maybe I did. I smiled. So what? Will you help me?" He studied my face. A long silence followed. Finally, he sighed again. "I have 8,000. I blinked. "That's all." He nodded. I looked at him. "You'd really lend me everything?" He frowned. You my friend? Silence. Such simple words. You my friend. In my first life, my family abandoned me. But Leo visited me in the hospital, bought me dinner when I was broke, stayed beside me when I lost everything. I suddenly felt guilty because I knew exactly how rare loyalty was. I smiled. I'll pay you back. You'd better. Then he grinned. And if this investment fails, you're washing dishes here. I laughed. Deal. That night, I invested again. Every dollar. Mine. And Leo's. Then I waited. 3 weeks later, our money tripled. Leo nearly fainted. He called me 14 times. I finally answered. Hello. What did you do? I laughed. What happened? Stop pretending. I laughed harder. Check your account. Silence. Then shouting. Then more shouting. Then he yelled, We're rich. People in the restaurant turned to stare at him. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Months passed. I kept investing. Again, and again, and again. The results were insane. My money doubled, then tripled, then multiplied again. At 24, I already had more money than I earned by 30 in my first life. Then something unexpected happened. I attended an investment seminar. Not because I needed advice, because I wanted connections. The conference room was packed. Business owners, investors, financial analysts. Everyone wore expensive suits. I wore a simple black shirt. Halfway through the seminar, someone sat beside me. I glanced up. Beautiful woman. Long black hair. Sharp eyes. Professional suit. She looked younger than most investors, but somehow far more confident. She noticed my laptop, then frowned. Actually frowned. What is this? I looked at her. My trading account. She frowned harder. You invested there? I nodded. She looked horrified. What? I smiled. Because it's going up. She stared at me. That's impossible. I shrugged. A few minutes later, she looked again, then frowned, then looked at me. Who taught you this? I smiled. No one. She laughed. I laughed too. Then she stopped laughing. Because I wasn't joking. Silence. She studied my face carefully. You taught yourself? Basically. Another silence. She slowly closed my laptop. No. I blinked. What? No normal person trades like this. I laughed. I'm serious. So am I. She looked genuinely confused, then finally extended her hand. Aria Bennett. I shook it. Mason Carter. She looked surprised. You're very young. You too. She laughed softly. That was the beginning. Over the next year, I saw her several times. At conferences, seminars, investment events. Each time, she looked more confused by me. Because my predictions kept coming true. 1 year later, I quietly became a millionaire. I paid Leo back with interest. Bought a small office. Hired 2 employees. Then 4. Then 10. And finally, I created my own investment company. I kept my identity private. No interviews. No photographs. No public appearances. I liked it that way. The media became curious. Articles appeared online. A mysterious young investor was making impossible predictions. Nobody knew his face. Nobody knew his age. Nobody even knew his real name. Social media became obsessed. Someone gave me a nickname. The Ghost Investor. The name spread everywhere. I laughed when I first saw it. Apparently, I had become famous without anyone knowing who I was. I looked out the window of my office. The city lights glowed below. My phone vibrated. A message from my mother. The first message in over a year. Where are you? Are you okay? I stared at it, then smiled. Interesting, because according to my relatives, I was still struggling somewhere. Still poor. Still failing. They had no idea. The son they threw away had already become the man everyone was talking about. The Ghost Investor. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it had in my first life. I owned an investment company with offices in 3 cities. I had employees, partners, investments worth millions. Every morning, I woke up excited instead of exhausted. I still use the nickname the media gave me. The Ghost Investor. Nobody knew my face. Nobody knew my age. Nobody knew I was only 25. I prefer it that way. Success feels different when it belongs entirely to you. One morning, Aria walked in my office holding a black envelope. She looked amused. What? She placed it on my desk. You've officially become important. I raised an eyebrow. Inside was an invitation. The National Investment Summit, the country's largest investment conference. Thousands of investors attended every year. Government officials, business leaders, financial media, some of the richest people in the country. I looked up. They want me to speak? Arya nodded. The closing speech. I laughed. Who made that decision? She smiled. The committee. I looked at the invitation again. Then at her. They don't even know what I look like. She laughed. Exactly. I leaned back. Interesting. 1 year ago, I was sleeping in cheap hotels and counting every dollar. Now, the biggest investment conference in the country wanted me on stage. Life really was strange. The event arrived 2 weeks later. The conference center was enormous. Hundreds of luxury cars filled the parking lot. Reporters stood near the entrance. Cameras flashed everywhere. I adjusted my tie, then looked at Arya. Nervous? She laughed. Shouldn't I be asking you that? I thought about it. Maybe. She smiled. You'll be fine. Leo suddenly appeared, wearing an expensive suit. He still looked uncomfortable in it. He grinned. Ready? I laughed. You look like you're going to a wedding. He looked offended. This suit cost me a fortune. Arya rolled her eyes. I smiled. For a moment, I simply looked at them. My best friend. My business partner. The people who stood beside me when I had nothing. Then we walked inside. The conference was already crowded. Investors talked excitedly. Reporters moved through the room. Large screens displayed my company logo. Everything looked surreal. An organizer approached us. Mr. Bennett, your speech starts in 20 minutes. I nodded, then looked toward the audience, and froze. 3 faces. Familiar faces. Impossible faces. My parents. And Mason. They sat near the front, looking around nervously. Apparently, they had come looking for investors. I remembered hearing rumors that Mason's business was struggling. Interesting. Then my mother looked toward the stage. Our eyes met. Silence. Her expression changed. Confusion. Shock. Disbelief. She blinked, then stared harder. Dad noticed. He followed her gaze. Then he froze too. Mason looked up and immediately turned pale. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I almost laughed, because they looked exactly the same as I had once looked, like people who had just seen a ghost. The organizer touched my arm. Mr. Bennett? I looked away. It's time. I nodded, then walked toward the stage. The lights felt warm. Thousands of people looked at me. Applause filled the room. I stepped behind the podium and glanced toward my family. Mom covered her mouth. Dad had already stood up. Mason looked like he couldn't breathe. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I adjusted the microphone, then smiled. Good evening. The room became quiet. I've been asked many times why I stay anonymous. A few people laughed. I smiled. The answer is simple. Silence. I spent most of my life believing success meant being recognized by other people. The audience listened carefully. I wanted approval. I paused. I wanted people to be proud of me. Silence. I wanted to be needed. I looked toward my parents. They stared at me. Neither moved. Neither blinked. I continued. Then one day, the room remained completely silent. I lost everything. I wasn't talking about money. I think they understood. At the time, I thought my life was over. I smiled. But losing everything forced me to ask myself one question. I paused. Who was I trying to impress? Silence. And once I stopped chasing that answer, I looked around the room. Everything changed. People listened carefully. I smiled. I stopped chasing approval and started investing in myself. Silence. Then, applause. Loud applause. It spread through the entire room. I looked toward my family again. My mother was crying. Tears ran down her face. Dad looked completely lost. Mason simply stared at me. The speech continued. I talked about discipline, patience, failure, opportunity. But the entire time, I could feel their eyes on me. By the time I finished, the entire room stood. Applause thundered around me. Cameras flashed. Reporters rushed toward the stage. Questions came immediately. Mr. Bennett, what's your next investment strategy? Do you plan to expand internationally? How did you become successful at such a young age? I answered a few questions. Then suddenly, someone pushed through the crowd. My mother. She was crying openly. Security almost stopped her. I raised my hand. It's okay. The room became quiet. She reached me, then stopped. For several seconds, she simply looked at me, like she couldn't believe I was real. Kind. Her voice broke. I said nothing. She reached toward my face, then lowered her hand. Tears kept falling. You. She couldn't finish. I waited. Finally, she whispered, "Please come home." Silence. The entire room seemed to disappear. Just those 3 words. Please come home. In my first life, I would have given anything to hear them. Anything. I spent years trying to be accepted, trying to earn love, trying to matter. And now, those words meant nothing, because I had already built a life without them. I looked past my mother, toward the entrance. Grandpa Arthur stood there, smiling proudly. Beside him stood Leo and Arya, the people who chose me, not because I was useful, not because I was successful, simply because they wanted me there. I suddenly smiled. My mother looked hopeful. I looked at her, then answered honestly, "I'm already home." Silence. Her face crumbled. Fresh tears appeared. I nodded politely, then stepped around her. No anger, no hatred, no bitterness, just peace. I walked toward Grandpa Arthur, toward Leo, toward Arya, and they smiled, because they understood. In my first life, I walked away from my family as someone unwanted. I walked away with empty pockets and a broken heart. But this time, I walked away differently. This time, I walked away as the winner. In my first life, I died alone. There was no dramatic accident, no final speech, no family gathered around my bed, just silence. I lay on the floor of my apartment, staring at the ceiling. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, everything was dark. The electricity had been cut off 2 days earlier. I laughed weakly. Even my apartment had given up on me. My chest hurt. Breathing felt difficult. I knew something was wrong. Maybe stress. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe my body had simply reached its limit. I didn't have the strength to care anymore. My phone lay beside me. 3% battery remaining. I picked it up. The screen looked painfully bright in the darkness. I opened my contacts. There were only 3 people I want to call. Dad, Mom, Mason, my younger brother. The people I'd spent my entire life loving, protecting, providing for. I pressed my father's number. Ring, ring, ring. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I stared at the screen. Then called my mother. Ring, ring, ring. No answer. A strange feeling spread through my chest. Not pain. Something colder. I opened my messages. The last text from my mother was 2 months old. "Take care of yourself." Funny. She hadn't asked if I was alive since then. I swallowed hard, then opened Mason's contact. For a moment, I simply stared at his name. Mason Carter, 27 years old. My little brother. The person I'd sacrificed everything for. I pressed call. Ring, ring. Then, click. I almost smiled. Mason. Silence. Then an annoyed voice answered. "What?" I blinked. I'm not feeling well." Silence. "I think I need help." Another silence. Then he sighed. A long, irritated sigh. "Seriously?" I frowned. "What?" "You always have problems." I didn't speak. He continued. "I'm busy." I closed my eyes. "Mason, I have dinner plans." I felt my fingers tremble. "Can you come over?" Silence. Then he laughed softly. Actually laughed. "You'll be fine." I couldn't breathe for a second. "I don't think I will." Silence. Then another sigh. "You worry too much." I stared at the dark ceiling. "I need my brother." The line became quiet. For one stupid second, I thought he might come. Then he spoke. "Call an ambulance." "I don't have money." Silence. Then, "Not my problem." The words hit harder than anything. I didn't speak. Neither did he. Finally, he said something that I would remember forever. "I can't keep fixing your mistakes." Click. The call ended. Silence filled the apartment. I stared at my phone, then laughed. A weak laugh, because I suddenly remembered something. Mistakes. Right. Apparently, everything was my fault. Not his gambling debts. Not his failed businesses. Not the loans I paid. Not the rent I covered. Not the opportunities one gave him. No. According to him, I was the problem. I looked around my apartment. The room was nearly empty. Most of my furniture had already been sold. The expensive watch on my wrist was gone. My car was gone. My savings were gone. Everything had disappeared because 3 years earlier, I lost everything in the stock market. A terrible investment. One wrong decision. My company collapsed. My finances collapsed. My life collapsed. And my family vanished. But before all that, I was successful. Very successful. I earned millions. Bought my parents a house. Paid for Mason's education. Invested in his businesses. Solved every crisis. Every problem. Every emergency. I became their provider. Their protector. Their safety net. I thought that was love. I thought family worked that way. I was wrong. Because people become comfortable receiving sacrifices. Eventually, they stop seeing the person making them. I remember the day I gave Mason $200,000. He didn't thank me. He simply said, "I knew you'd help." I remember buying my parents a new house. My father complained about the neighborhood. I remembered paying my mother's medical bills. She cried, not because she was grateful, because she worried people would think our family was struggling. I kept giving, 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 until there was nothing left. Then I lost everything. And suddenly, everyone became busy. My parents stopped calling. Mason stopped visiting. Family dinners stopped. Birthdays stopped. Even holidays disappeared. I went from being essential to being inconvenient. The rain outside grew heavier. I looked at my phone. 1% battery. I smiled weakly. Perfect timing. I suddenly felt very tired. My breathing became slower. I looked at my contacts one last time. Dad, Mom, Mason. Nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody came. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. Just disappointed. I had spent my entire life living for other people, trying to make them happy, trying to be useful, trying to earn love. And in the end, I died alone anyway. A strange calm settled over me. I closed my eyes. My body felt heavy. Then one final thought appeared. Simple, clear, painful. I wish I could start over. Darkness swallowed everything. Then I heard something. Birds. I frowned. Birds? Warm sunlight touched my face. I opened my eyes and froze. White ceiling, blue curtains, desk, books, my bedroom, my old bedroom. I sat up so quickly that my head spun. No, impossible. I looked around. The room looked exactly the same. The posters, the bookshelf, the old fan, everything. My breathing became uneven. I stumbled toward the mirror, then stopped. A young man stared back. Black hair, clear skin, no exhaustion, no wrinkles around the eyes, no signs of years of stress. I touched my face. The reflection did the same. I looked younger, much younger. Then I saw it. The calendar on my desk. June 12th. 3 years ago. I stopped breathing. 3 years. 3 years before my death. 3 years before the bad investments. 3 years before bankruptcy. 3 years before everyone abandoned me. I stared at the date. Again and again. Then slowly. I smiled. Then laughed. Then laughed harder. I wasn't dead. I had come back. I was 23 again. I had another chance. A second life. I looked at my reflection. This time, there were no tears. Only certainty. In my first life, I lived for my family. I sacrificed everything. I gave until there was nothing left. And I died with no one beside me. Not this time. This time, I wasn't going to live for them. I was going to live for myself. I was going to make money. A lot of money. I was going to become rich enough, powerful enough, successful enough, that nobody could ever ignore me again.